Mental toughness is the ability to remain positive and proactive in the most adverse of circumstances. Jim Aftermouth. Hey there, welcome to the Retirement Answer Man Show. My name is Roger Whitney. Let me get that music down. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but actually have the confidence, because you've done the work, to lean in and rock retirement. And mental toughness is a big thing in retirement because there is so much uncertainty that you can't exonerate yourself from. What's going to happen in the markets? What's going to happen with inflation? And Rosie and Dwayne, after retiring about a year ago and experiencing the bear market last year, are having to exhibit some mental toughness. And what do we do to make sure that we are on course? And we're going to talk with Rosie today about where they're at, what kind of advice they're getting, what they understand about their situation, to help them assess, are we still on a feasible path or do we need to make some minor adjustments? This is an important time to have that mental toughness because, bam, we just got popped in the face by the markets and inflation, and we can't ignore it. We can't obsess about it, but we can't ignore it because sooner we acknowledge where we're at now and affirm that we're on a safe course or that we are deviating from that safe course. The sooner we can identify that, the quicker we can mitigate damages and proactively get back on course. Whatever that means. And everything is on the table in negotiating how do we get back on course. The extra travel, part-time work, all sorts of things. Everything has to be on the table so you can negotiate a plan of record that fits what you care about. It's important. You got to be mentally tough to do that because we don't want to ignore it and just let somebody else tell us we're going to be okay without really understanding how they got to that decision and then wind up 6 months, a year from now and say, oh, wait a second, we're like way off course now. We don't want that because that becomes bigger conversations, which are never fun. So we're going to talk with Rosie and get an idea of where they're at there. We're going to answer some of your questions. So let's get going with the show. I want to invite you to join me live on February 2nd at 7 p.m. Central. We're going to do two things. One is you and I are going to be live with Rosie, and we're going to walk through her goals, their current financial situation, and we're going to assess whether that plan is feasible and then brainstorm risks and opportunities to make sure it remains feasible or gets back on course. And you're going to be able to be live with us and ask questions. That's going to be a blast. And you can register at livewithroger.com. Secondly, I'm going to invite you to join the Rock Retirement Club and learn how to create a plan to retire with confidence and use the best-in-class retirement planning tools that we're going to give you a club member to create your own plan and get support from me, my team of coaches, as well as 1,000+ Rock Retirement Club members that are all on this same journey. It's a pretty special group. Over the last 4 years, because we're just entering our 5th year, I've seen people go from entering a little confused about how retirement works and a little leery about what is possible. I've seen them transform to having confidence to manage their plan and really lean into rocking life and retirement. And I'd love to see you do that too. So you can register for this at livewithroger.com. All right, Rosie. Well, we are almost done, right?
We are. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We have some discussion today, and then on February 2nd, you'll be live with me with listeners, and we'll walk through everything that we talked about and put it into a form to do some feasibility analysis as, is this feasible? And then we'll try to help you come up with some solutions. Sound good?
Sounds real good.
Now, before we started today, you said you had a number of random questions from our conversation. So why don't we close those loops as best we can before we get into what I'm going to talk about?
Okay. One of my questions was regarding the budget. And when we talked last, you mentioned that we weren't including the health insurance in that. And so I was just curious why that is.
Good question. The reason it is because I have assumptions that I'll use for healthcare, medical expenses separately. I use a database that knows premiums, knows what Medicare expenses are, and what average out of pocket is, and we'll use a different inflation rate. So I'm going to account for that separate because it has its own rhythm of things that's a little bit separate from just general spending. So that was the reason. So we're going to account for it, just be a little separate.
Okay, good. All right. And then kind of related to budget also, I don't think I mentioned, we primarily, a good portion of our spending is coming from our investments. And we did not talk much about, we have a couple more, say, $5,000 worth of house updates we need to do. I don't know if we need to worry about throwing that into the budget or if we can.
Well, that's a good question. So do we have some that are high resolution that you know are going to be happening?
Yes.
Okay, so give me those.
Okay, we need to re-carpet like the basement.
Okay.
That up. We have some in the garage shelving that needs to be that kind of thing and painting stuff.
Okay. And
they're not huge. I would say, overall, maybe 5,000.
And when do you plan on doing that?
Would like to do it next year.
In 2023 or 4?
3.
23, okay. And that's 5,000 total.
Yeah.
Okay. So the answer to your question is we definitely want to include things that are higher resolution, like you're going to have this expense, right?
Okay.
And you're already planning on it. So we'll factor that into the cash flow model that we build. Okay.
Sounds good. Another question I had was I sent you information on our annuity, and I just was kind of curious what your thoughts. Annuities are complicated, and I can't sit here and say that I fully understand what I own. I have an idea, but I've read different types of annuities and such, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts or what feedback from what I sent you.
Yeah, let's talk about it in general terms. And then I'm going to turn that question around is you own it, you bought it. What is your understanding of it? But let me walk through the general terms of it as I see it. So hold on one second.
Okay.
All right. I pulled it up here in front of me. And what we have here is, I'm just going to read the general terms. Okay. It looks like you bought this in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
The current value is $165,000.
Okay.
The current surrender value is $139,000.
Okay.
Let me ask, do you understand the difference between those two numbers?
Well, the 165, I never really have totally understood what that number is. I think the 139 means if I were to cash it out, that's what I get. It would be the proceeds.
Exactly. So the current account value, so the actual value of it is $165,900.
Okay.
And the surrender value is the $139,000. The difference between that is this type of annuity, when you buy it, there is a back-end sales charge that decreases over time.
Okay.
And so the longer you own it, that amount will go down and eventually will be equal.
Oh, okay.
And that is the compensation that the advisor received. Not necessarily that spread, but that's the structure of it. And so that's the difference between the two.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know that's where it was, but.
Yeah. So that is over time, they'll equal out. That can be anywhere from 3 years to 10 years, depending on the contract. Now, when we're talking about annuities, and this one is owned within an IRA, right? So when we're talking about annuities, have you ever been in a wine store?
Yes.
And I was just at one the other day, and I wanted to try a different type of Pinot Noir.
Okay.
And there were countless selections, right? All these different labels, and then every label is from a different winery. So that's confusing. And then every winery has different years. And so it's sort of this tapestry of all these different colors, and everyone is different. And it's hard to understand what is different from one vintage and to the other, right?
Yes.
That's a little bit of how variable annuities are.
Okay.
Every annuity has a vineyard who produced it.
Okay.
And whatever they produced has a vintage, what year it is. Okay. Because 1 year of the same wine might be different in character than another year because they change some of the dynamics and the riders and the costs, etc.
Okay.
And so it gets really confusing that way, right? So it's going to be difficult for me to dive too deeply into this one without doing research on this particular vintage of this winery. Does that make sense?
Gotcha.
Okay. But we'll do some. And so we have the value, and you have a couple riders, which are tag-alongs, right?
Yeah.
The first one is you have a guaranteed lifetime withdrawal benefit base, and that base is $216,000. So do you know what that means?
I don't know that I do.
Okay. So this has a lifetime annual income rider as well. And so it has an income base of $216,000, even though it's only worth $165,000.
Okay.
And so the 165 is real money that's invested in something.
Okay.
The cash surrender value is what you could get out of it in the sales charge that would occur right now. The benefit base of $216,000 isn't real money.
Okay.
It's a base for determining what a guaranteed payment might be to you based on the terms of the rider. And so this has some type of annuity feature of giving you guaranteed payments likely for the rest of your life. What that payment to you will be based off of this benefit base.
Okay.
Even though it's not real money. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
And if this is typically what would happen is, let's assume you said, I want to start my guaranteed income. And they're going to say, okay, well, your benefit base is $216,000. You get X percent based off of whatever formula they have baked into the annuity.
Okay.
And then that would be guaranteed payments to you. Typically, it also hits your cash value of the value of your policy. But again, typically, even if your value of your policy goes to zero, they would pay out for the rest of your life.
Okay.
Right. So that's what the income base is. So it's not real money. It's just for that guaranteed income amount. And based on the documents you sent me, it doesn't tell me what the income base amount is. Well, it tells me the income base, doesn't tell me the formula to calculate the payment.
Okay. And for some reason, and this is what I'm remembering, is that if we hold it 10 years before we do any withdrawal, then it would be roughly, and I'm going on memory here, so like $1,200, $1,250, something like that a month.
Okay.
So somewhere in there.
So likely it's structured that benefit base for withdrawals, not real money, would increase by at least a certain percentage each year.
Okay.
And after 10 years, the formula says it would pay you $1,200 a month.
Gotcha.
It's good to get a summary as best as you can because these things can be complicated and refresh these understandings. And then most likely, because it has investments, there's probably something, this is like an index-based annuity, it looks like.
I saw that. Mm-hmm.
And it's invested. So your $165,000 is invested. Let me pull that page up. In two investments. It has what's called the S&P 500 monthly sum index account and the Morgan Stanley dynamic allocation index account. And each of those has a charge, a rider charge to them. Essentially what these are is you're not actually invested, like say the S&P 500 monthly sum index account, you're actually not invested in the S&P 500. It has a formula that based on how it works on a monthly basis, if it goes up, you get credited some money, but if it goes down, you don't.
Oh, they're using it like as a basis type thing.
Right. And likely there is some type of feature that if it goes up more than your normal increase in your benefit base for withdrawals, that you might get a step up. Best not to count on those though. For clarity purposes, I would want to have worst case scenario in 10 years, I can get $1,200 a month.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That would be good to know, work off of worst case. And then everything else would be gravy, but I wouldn't count on that just because the way they're structured, the drag is so much. So does that jive with what you thought it was, or what was your use case for buying this at the time?
It was to just secure some more guaranteed income. I mean, for the most part. I mean, since we don't have a pension, and this one is set up like if I were, I don't know what you call it,
beneficiary?
Maybe the primary.
Probably, you get, this
so
is your
if
husband,
I were to
Dwayne.
pass before my husband, he doesn't. He's out.
Okay, so this is life only then.
Right.
Okay, life only for you. Okay.
Yes.
And these types of products aren't necessarily a bad thing for finding guaranteed income, right? Because the traditional way you might do it is to buy a deferred income annuity, a very plain, vanilla, fixed type of annuity. Some of these products can actually give you better guarantees than those. So that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. They just are really confusing. That
was one of my questions. Is this the type of annuity, if you recommend annuities, or even what you typically see, are these common?
They are common, yes. The type of thing that's sold, not sought.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right?
Okay.
Right? Because they're a good example. And I'm working on a case recently where we wanted to secure income in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And we got quotes for an immediate annuity or deferred income annuity, just the very fixed organic type,
Mm-hmm.
and got the guaranteed payments that would be expected. It was
Okay.
actually sort of like this. We wanted to start in like 6 years, and we were backing into the amount of guaranteed income that we wanted. I think we wanted $60,000 a year. So we backed into the amount that we needed that, and we built quotes off of that. Not me. I have someone that does this because I don't have my insurance licenses any longer. And we looked at these organic ones, and then we looked at a variable annuity index product that had a guarantee, and it was much more attractive than the organic product.
Okay.
So we ended up doing that. After a lot of what am I missing here? Because of the complication, you want to, where are the time bombs? Don't tell me about the features. Just tell me, am I getting this income at this date? Worst case scenario. So yeah, these are somewhat common, but generally they're overcomplicated. People buy them for the complication rather than trying to keep the main thing the main thing. I just want some secure income. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. Just in general, for years, I didn't see any value in annuities. And even after we bought this, we've had conversations. Should we have done this? Is this the right thing? So, I mean, fortunately, we didn't really put that much into it. And so far, I'm guessing it's an okay thing.
Yeah, the hard part is that you lose a lot of optionality because it sounds like there's probably a 10-year surrender on this. So it's a little bit like a timeshare. You can get into them fairly easily. You can't get out of them very easily at all. And when I say they're sold, not sought, usually it's somebody presenting it and emphasizing the benefits and not really, is this what you need to solve what you're trying to accomplish? Right. So it's normal to have. It doesn't look like it's anything horrible.
Okay.
And I've seen horrible, by the way.
Okay, good. And that's what we've all heard of, is the horrible.
Yeah. Okay, so if that answers that question, what's your next random question?
I might have covered budget things. I think we got most of them right there.
You had one on the software, I think.
Oh, yeah, on the Monte Carlo tool.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen different tools, and our investment advisors taken us through some. And I just wondered if the Monte Carlo tool that you've used in the past on these live is what the Rock Retirement Club shares or teaches on.
Yeah, so I think you saw last year's with Jolene.
Mm-hmm.
And in that one, we used New Retirement Calculator. We had license for club members. We actually switched this year. We made a pivot to using what's called Money Guide Pro Elite, which is what I use in my practice. And then that's what you get access to in the club. So what you'll see when we're together, and that is a tool that I used in previous iterations of Retirement Plan Live. So so you'll see that as well. All these tools aren't perfect. They're a tool, right? It's what you do with it. How do you use it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you had a list of random questions to clarify on things, because that means you're active in collaborating with me. So that's great. So what I want to talk about today is some risk and just your perspective on making this plan resilient. Once we get to a feasible plan, we have to figure out how do we make it resilient so we don't get knocked off course, and sort of some of the things we hope don't happen. And I think when we were talking beforehand, what was it you said?
I said, I think the worst case has already happened.
Maybe, right? It's a bear market. And as you've stated before, your retirement security is based a lot on your retirement assets. You don't have huge pensions or multi-millions of dollars.
Right.
Let's first talk about what professionals call sequence of return risk. Do you know what that means?
I do.
So why don't you describe what you understand it to be?
Well, I understand it as we know the market's going to fluctuate, and we know there's just various cycles. And so sequence of return risk is, what's the risk that early on in your retirement, when your balance is hopefully at one of its higher levels, that the market returns stay relatively, well, hopefully at least 4% profitable, which of course they haven't. But when the market goes down, the risk is higher when you're early on in retirement than it is possibly later after you've gained some more equity.
Right, because you have less money working for you because you still need to take your paycheck out of it. So good job.
Right.
Good job. Now, you had talked about your husband and your husband being very enamored with risk, comfortable with risk in terms of investments going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about his investment strategy on a high level first. So if I were to look at his accounts, does it individual stocks? What kinds of things does he own?
Individual stocks. So there's a couple that he's loved for life. I know Microsoft is one of them. I can't think of the other one, but he's the kind that likes to like research and then he'll find what he thinks is a winner. And then he likes to buy that and see what happens. So had a really good run with, what is that called? I'm going to have a blank.
What do they make?
They do the automatic pay when you buy online. They're doing the
PayPal or Stripe.
It wasn't PayPal, but it was Shopify.
Okay.
And there's been others over the years, but typically he'll have his 2 or 3 favorites that he doesn't get rid of ever, even when they're doing very well. And then he might find another one here or there.
Okay. And so how many stocks does he own usually?
Today, I'd say 3 to 5.
3 to 5 for the whole portfolio?
No, just for his little play money.
Okay.
Started out, yeah.
Okay. So, and roughly how much is in the play money relative to your assets?
At this point, maybe 10%.
10%? Okay.
Maybe so.
Okay. Play money is okay, but about 10% of the value of your investment assets. And so how are the rest of the investment assets allocated? Fairly
risky. So how we did it is when we moved all of our employer 401k money, he had his 401k, I had mine. And over the years, there were periods of time when we primarily saved in mine because I had a better deal or whatever it was, or he didn't have it as an option. So when we moved it all, he had the account that we say he manages, 401k that rolled over for him that the manager is managing, but he's directing. And then my 401k money, and then our Roths and the annuity type of thing.
Okay.
But so in his 401k money is 100% stock, but it's way more diversified.
And so how much is in his 401k, roughly?
Now you're asking me the hard questions. And I had
just rounded.
Okay. It is. I'm sorry, but I'm really totally drawing a blank. So let me just look here. Got it right here somewhere. Okay. It is as part of overall. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Probably maybe 12%.
Oh, 12% of the overall is 100% stocks.
On his, well, really would be more then. It'd be more like totally between the one that he manages and the one that's his 401k.
So 22%.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the assets are the 78% are under your purview.
Well, a couple of them are Roths.
Okay.
Would be maybe another 5% Roths. We got a late start there.
Okay.
So probably not quite half is in my 401k because we have the annuity too.
Yeah. So if we put the annuity aside, let's look at it this angle. What percentage of your assets are in stocks versus bonds?
Okay, this is just going off the top of my head, but I would say 75.
75% stocks.
I think so.
Okay.
Because I think mine is 50-50.
And then factor in the other. That's good enough for what we're doing here.
Okay.
And then roughly, I know we just had a bear market. Do you have a clue for how much your portfolio went down for the year?
Yeah, it's a little bit muddy because we've taken some good size withdrawals too. So
okay, your advisor hasn't given you the reconciled amount yet.
Not really, but we have a spreadsheet and I'm thinking it's 20%.
You're down about 20%?
Good 20, yeah. It's been worse. Well, that was at the end of November.
Okay. Sounds like an aggressive portfolio.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a silly question to ask when you're down, but how do you feel about that, being that aggressive?
I didn't mind it at all until, if this would have happened, maybe I'm wrong, but if this would have happened 3 years from now, I feel like I would have felt less anxious because we would have had a few years under our belt. We would have had a bit of extra gain. We had no time to get any extra gain before this happened. So I feel pretty anxious. Like we need to figure out what this means, what the impact is, what do we need to do today to make sure we're okay tomorrow. And at the same time, it is time to go because we are at the age. We're definitely in the go-go. So it's a conflict to me.
Okay. And have you and your husband and advisor had talks about, okay, now that we've lost 20% on paper, what that has done to the feasibility of your plan?
We've not. We're probably going to not at any detail level. I mean, we've had just kind of short-term conversation about what do we do in the short term right now, but we need that conversation probably in January. We will do that.
Okay. So by the time this airs, we'll have had that conversation. And when we're live on February 2nd, you would have had that conversation.
We did have one conversation where we run the Monte Carlo and it was very ugly. I mean, so we just talked at a very high level, just push the button, rerun it. And he's like, I don't even want to share these numbers with you without having a conversation. But we kind of just wanted to know.
So were there any suggestions on what to do now? Or it was, we'll deal with this in January?
I think it was more like, we'll deal with this the next time we sit down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're about 75% stocks, the rest in bonds. Now, do you keep cash reserves outside of your investments?
No.
Okay. And then when you need money to pay for life, how do you get that?
So we have a monthly stipend that we've agreed upon. And then if we need anything extra, we try not to call every 10 minutes. Like at the beginning of the year, last year, we said, can we get an extra chunk? And so we just did it that way. That's the preference.
Okay. So they're sending you money every month.
Every month.
From the account. Yeah. And where is that money coming from?
Well, my understanding is in our account, some of the investments are lined up as to be liquid for those payments.
So it'd be a money market. There's cash.
Well, yeah. When I go on the brokerage account and I look at the statement, I don't see a ton of money in the money market, maybe a month's worth. So I don't understand some of the investments that feed that, I guess, is where I don't know how much of it's fixed income or.
When you look at your statement, does it show that it's selling something every few months to raise money? We
do see transactions like that. And I feel like I see some income. I got to be honest, I don't look at it that much because that old thing, if it doesn't come in front of your face, you just don't always look at it. But I see all these transactions that I don't always understand, but they're automated. I can tell they're automated.
Okay.
It's like 250 here. So I think they're like dividend payments maybe. And
yeah. And how much is your monthly stipend roughly?
Right now, gross or net?
Gross.
$8,500.
Okay. So you're probably not getting $8,500 a month in income.
No.
So
we are definitely drawing from principal.
Which would be either it's coming from cash, but you said there's not much cash. So it sounds like that you have some systematic selling of investments.
Must be.
Okay. That would be good to know.
Okay.
Exactly. And maybe that's one thing we can put together is what should my agenda be when I have this conversation with the advisor?
Yeah, that would be great.
So
because we have talked about, I've asked kind of that question. When I look at this account, this brokerage account, and I look at these different investments that we have, which one of these are you getting this money from? And I can't say that I really understand what the answer was necessarily. But
you should.
I should, absolutely. But I don't know if I didn't ask enough questions or I understood it at the minute or what.
Yeah. And it's been a while since you've had an in-depth conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes you understand it at the minute and then you don't remember later.
I totally get that. Okay. And I think we talked about this briefly. Let's move on a little bit. You don't have long-term care insurance and no life insurance. Okay. So those are potential risks. So let's talk a little bit about your experience with advisors. You talked a little bit about this last time, and we said we would dive into it. I am interested in this, and I think it would be helpful for others. And let's start with what you had. So it sounds like you've had a few iterations of advisors.
Yes. So
go ahead.
I don't know how many years ago, probably, 20 years ago. We had always you're in the accumulation years, you just throw it in your 401k. We didn't talk to anyone, didn't know anything. And then we finally decided we probably should have someone. So we hired an advisor who actually was a tax person. And so he was doing investments, but also tax person, and probably only had him 2 or 3 years when the market crashed and we lost a ton of money. And at the time, our ignorance, I would say, because I don't think that he was necessarily not a good advisor. I just think that we didn't know enough. But I was like, well, man, we could have been managing our own money and done that.
Yeah.
We were like, well, let's just go buy the S&P 500 and forget this. I mean, that's kind of what happened, it felt like. So we decided to switch. And I had a friend at work that told me about someone. So we switched to them, and their parents were quite wealthy. So I thought, okay, this person knows how to handle this. Well, that was a wrong assumption. So that advisor, we probably had quite a while. And again, during the accumulation years, but no real advice being given. And when it got closer to retirement and it was time to figure out where's cash flow, what do we need to be doing, couldn't answer any questions, could not even get us a cash flow statement. And I'm like, I'm explaining what I want for a cash. What I need you to show me is ABC. There's no way your brokerage firm doesn't have something. They've got to have some software. And after a while, why am I having these conversations? This is why I'm paying them.
Right.
So it was just a really eye-opener. You really can get in some crazy situations and be paying for things that you're not getting any advice and then, very unaware.
And let's fast forward to your current advisor. And so I wrote down some questions.
Okay.
What do they do for you?
Early on, they do the investing and then manage the cash flow and the payments. So the big thing that has happened for us was we've gotten a lot of education from them of really understanding how things do work. And that was the first advisor that actually could do kind of these cash flow and this whole Monte Carlo scenario to give us some sense of where we are, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're a typical financial planner that does use traditional tools to.
Okay. So more aware of financial planning, it sounds like, than the others.
Way more aware. Yes.
Okay. How are they paid?
On like a percent of portfolio.
Okay. Are you willing to share that percentage or no? It's okay if not.
I am, but just today I was thinking about it. I knew it was under 1%, but I don't know what it is.
Okay.
Because our last guy was a 0.5%. So I'm willing to share, but I need to look it up.
Yeah, that's understandable. It's one of those things you don't look at very often.
Right. And I was just thinking about it the other day.
Yeah. Okay. And then how were your previous advisors paid?
Same.
Who sold you the annuity?
The current advisor.
The current advisor. So that was actually a commission product. Did you know that?
I did.
Which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking in reference of, did they explain that to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we knew it too, but I mean, we had conversation about it. I knew that. And actually we had frank conversation about it because I said, I don't know that I believe in these things. I know that you get a huge commission and we don't even necessarily maintain value because you don't have to have one if you don't want it. I'm just suggesting this product as a way to secure some income.
Okay.
So,
because there's a switching of hats there from fiduciary to salesperson. And that's a thing that they're supposed to manage, just like I used to have to manage when I had my securities licenses. So I get that. The last question I have, maybe, because I may think of more, but is, so you have an advisor, you understand how you pay them. They help manage the investments. They do with the administration of managing the cash flows. They've provided a lot of education. On an ongoing basis, how do you judge how they're doing their job?
This might seem a little simple, but in some ways, if I call or I text and I have a question, their response and willingness to address it and is a big thing to me. Like, yeah, we can talk today if you need to, but if it's just as well, I'd rather do Thursday or whatever it is. Like responsiveness and then explaining the answers to the questions and that kind of thing is huge value to me.
Yeah, especially in this world of 800 numbers or no phone numbers at all, right?
Yeah, right.
And I actually will be interested in, and as much as you're willing, maybe after you have the annual meeting, because this is a pivotal meeting. Mm-hmm. You know what's hit the fan.
Right.
His updated scenarios look really bad.
Yes.
And how you navigate that's pretty important.
Right. I think too, at the time, he kind of wanted to hedge a little bit more time rather than, he didn't want us to overreact at that moment. Let's just go with a couple more months or whatever.
Yeah. It's an interesting balance when you retire and a bear market happens is you don't want to be reactionary, but you also want to act early enough to where you can mitigate things. You have options, right? It doesn't spiral to where your options get more limited. That's a balance there, right?
That's what you start thinking is, okay, so then when do I just pull out? In which you don't want to do.
Yeah, it makes me think of 2008 when we had, I forget what 2008 was, 25% down. Mm-hmm. And then the first quarter of 2009 was another 22%. With no end in sight, it can just get worse, right? And I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but it could. It could. And you don't have a lot of shock absorber cash-wise.
No, that is a huge problem. And man, that whole idea of going back to work is awful. I would have rather just stayed working. Hindsight's 2020, but I would have just stayed working.
So what we're going to do when we meet live with everybody is we're going to do fresh analysis, integrating the values, the goals, the cash flows to those goals, all of your resources, the allocation that you have, and we're going to see whether it's feasible going forward. And if it's not, then we're going to try to navigate to something that gives us some feasibility. And we'll just have to brainstorm options, right? Going back to work is like, that's the worst option.
Totally is.
And so we don't want to hit it with sledgehammer if we can tweak a number of things to get to a solution. I don't know what the answer is going to be. Or whether it's feasible or not. I haven't even done it yet.
I feel like what we've outlined, our spending desires are probably not feasible, but depending on when the market turns, you could possibly do some of that. It just might not be on the timeline we hope for. I don't know. But also, I guess the other thing is almost all these models, they don't run your money to zero on your projected death. Well, sometimes they do. But when you get the feasibility at 80%, almost all of them at 80%, you end up with almost the same amount of money you started with, it feels like. Just take like Jolene's example from last year. I mean, I know the feasibility analysis had a huge range, but in general, you're going to pretty much die with what you started with. And it feels like they're built in somehow.
The difficulty is we don't know, like a Monte Carlo scenario structure has, say, 1,000 iterations, right? Mm-hmm. And it's assuming everything acts exactly like we planned, and the only variable is returns.
Mm-hmm. Or inflation, right?
Well, inflation typically isn't factored in as a variable either. It's in there, but as a constant. But so a Monte Carlo scenario that says an 81% confidence number, all that means is 81% of the trials did as good or better than expected. Mm-hmm. And that's helpful. But the problem is you, Rosie, only care about your iteration. N is 1 for you. You don't care about N equals 1,000.
Right.
You just care about your iteration, and we have no clue which one that's going to be.
Exactly.
And that's where it gets a little difficult. And then you start to factor in, if you have spending assumption, inflation assumptions, tax assumptions that are forecasting for 30 years, those are just guesses. We can't see over the horizon because it's such a long time horizon. So the possible outcomes just gets wider and wider, which isn't as helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be interesting to work through together.
Mm-hmm. Interesting is a good word for it, Roger. I like that.
We're just working the problem. We know what the issues are. Well, we know what's happened. Now we just have to work it.
Right. And this year, one of your goals was to get, have a case that's more typical of an average American. I don't know if that's what that is. But in this case, I think that while that might be true, we're closer to an average American, that maybe some of our investment choices or budget desires are not as typical. I don't know.
As a case, I don't think of it as a case, just so you know.
Okay.
All I care about is at the end of this, that Rosie and Dwayne have some pathway to work through their options. A case sounds sterile. That's what a doctor says about a subject. You're not a subject. This is your life, right? So I want to respect that and make sure you and I work to figure out what's right for you, regardless of what it does for anybody else.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So I want to make sure we focus there. All right. So thank you for being so open and sharing during this month.
Sure. Well, if we aren't just upfront with where we are, then you can't get the right information.
Yeah. First,
garbage in, garbage out.
radically accept reality and go from there. So thank you so much for your openness.
Sure.
Now it's time to answer your questions. If you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger, or we should have a link in 6 Shot Saturday if you get our weekly email. So today's questions, let's see. We're going to start with Rob, who has a question on withdrawal strategies. And this would be in the optimization phase of a retirement plan. He says, I do have a question on the strategy of using tax-deferred dollars to pay for life or doing Roth conversion. Do you consider the opportunity cost of letting those dollars continue to grow, less the taxes you pay eventually, versus taking the money now and paying the tax up front? That's a great question, Rob. So let's break this down and think through this logically. First off, let's talk about what he's referring to. So if you need to pull from your assets to pay for part of your retirement paycheck, that money has to come from someplace. And generally, you're going to have after-tax assets, which are your bank accounts and brokerage accounts, money you've already paid tax on that might be invested. And that is the default scenario, is that you deplete that bucket first. Once that bucket is depleted of all your after-tax assets, like money you have in your bank, then you would go to your tax-deferred assets, which would be IRAs, traditional IRAs, and traditional 401ks, money that you've never paid tax on. And then if you've depleted that bucket, then if you had some tax-free assets like Roth schemes of IRAs or 401ks, then you would go to that. The traditional method of retirement planning is that you go in that order. You deplete the after-tax, then you go to the tax-deferred, then you go to tax-free. Rob wants to know, if you choose to take money from a tax-deferred asset first, or partially, before you deplete your after-tax assets, do you calculate the opportunity cost of doing that? Because if you take money from an IRA before you need to, you have a couple of things happening. One is that will be a taxable event. It's going to be like taxable income, so you're going to pay tax on that amount. So that's a drag. That dollar that you take out might only be 80 cents. Plus, that dollar is not going to be able to continue to grow in a tax-deferred way. And there's an opportunity cost there. So do you calculate that in there, Rob? The short answer is yes. You can either do that in retirement planning software. If you run a what-if scenario, taking money from IRAs, it will calculate the opportunity cost that you can compare against the base scenario where you do it the more traditional way. And you can definitely build spreadsheets to model that as well. What I have found, though, when you're thinking through this question, Rob, is that the spreadsheets and the scenarios that you build in, say, retirement planning software is going to be a piece of the puzzle. But you got to be careful. It is not the entire puzzle. When you look at a spreadsheet or you look at fancy software that is projecting out over 30 years, it's easy to see the black and white numbers and assume certainty, when in fact, it's just one guess about the future flow of things. And having a false sense of security with the numbers these projections make could lead you down to suboptimal decisions. That's for a couple reasons. One is you're projecting things that can't be figured out. You can't figure out long-term inflation rate's going to be, or what your sequence of return are going to be, what the taxable scheme is going to be, what tax rates are going to be, what your actual spending is going to be. And when you do these long-term scenarios, you're making a ton of assumptions of things that are going to be very fluid and not necessarily work out the way that you assume. You have to do that because the system needs it. That coupled with the fact that if you are, say, doing a scenario over your retirement lifetime, which may be 30 years, that means you have very uncertain assumptions being projected out over a very long period of time, which means that there's going to be a bigger spread of what the possible outcomes could be. So those scenario planning from a software or spreadsheet standpoint are helpful, but they're definitely not the whole picture. So what do you do about that? You definitely run these kind of scenarios because they give you some pieces to the puzzle, but I would also, in the optimization phase, build a version 1, a V1 of tapping your assets the traditional way of taking out from all of your after-tax assets, then going to tax deferred, and then going to tax-free. Make that version 1 of your feasible plan of record. Once you have that version 1, then you can make a what-if scenario saying, what if I take some money out of my IRA either to do Roth conversions or to fund my life? And you can start to model and compare them next to each other. The way that I do that is typically not in software, but in a relatively straightforward spreadsheet where I map out the cash flows for the first 5 to 8 years, showing all the income sources and all the spending. So I see with tax estimates showing the deficit that my income isn't going to cover. And that's the money I have to pull from my assets. And then I map that out over 5 to 8 years. And once I've done that, Rob, then I can say, look at that. Year 2, I have very low income and I have, let's say, $100,000 I need from my assets to cover the gap. Yes, you could draw from your after-tax assets to cover that $100,000 gap and then just move forward depleting that. But if you think a little bit, if you deplete your after-tax assets, what you're going to do is limit your optionality later in life when all you have is tax-deferred assets. That means any monies that you need in the future, you're going to be handicapped as to your flexibility of where you get that money because you'll just have those tax-deferred assets. Whereas if I see in year 2, I'm going to be, let's say I'm going to have $10,000 in income in year 2 and I need 100, so that means I need 90,000 from my assets. The traditional method would say just take it from your after-tax assets because that's the most tax efficient today and then keep deferring. But if you acknowledge that you're never really eliminating your tax liability, you're just managing the timing of when you realize that tax liability. If you keep deferring, you're just pushing the tax liability out into the future, which may be beneficial to you, but you don't know what tax rates are going to be. You haven't figured out your RMDs, your required minimum distributions, where you're going to be forced to take money out, and you don't know what your needs are going to be 10 years from now. Whereas you do know that if I have $10,000 in income and I need $100,000, so I need 90 from my financial assets, and I'm married and I'm filing jointly, the top of the 12% bracket with a standard deduction is right around $100,000. I have the opportunity to not take $90,000 out of my after-tax assets, but actually to take some money out of my tax-deferred assets, pay the tax at the 12% bracket, and use that to help fund my life. And essentially that choice, if you were to choose to make that, would be that, one, I'm willing to pay 12% tax on this money today versus I don't know what I will pay in the future. Another impact of that would be now I can preserve my after-tax assets. So in the future, I'll have more after-tax assets that will give me more flexibility. And then also what you will give up, as you're pointing out here, Rob, is that, well, I have less money growing in the IRA, which could be negative on the return, but it also means that it would reduce your required minimum distribution proportionally, which could benefit you later on. So you definitely want to include that opportunity cost in that, Rob. I think one thing that gets missed in a lot of this analysis is the concept of We're not actually avoiding tax. We're just choosing to pay a tax rate so we have more certainty on what it is today versus what it could be in the future. And two, we tend to greatly undervalue optionality or flexibility in our decisions. That's probably more than you wanted, but hopefully that gives you some perspective of how I think about it. Our next question comes from Kelly about leaving her 401k assets there and using those resources within the 401k rather than rolling them out to an IRA. Says, you may have covered this and I missed it, but I wanted your thoughts on drawdown strategies for those of us where most of our retirement assets remains in a 401k and we want to leave it that way. After being a fiduciary on our 401k committee for years, I want to leave the funds there because of the lower institutional fees and professional oversight. But using the bond ladder strategy option isn't really available to us. I'm thinking a close proximity alternatively would be simply keeping a healthy amount of cash or short-term bond opportunities and then rebalancing at some point. But so essentially, Kelly wants to know, hey, I want to leave my money in my 401k. I get the concept of building out an income floor to help pay for my life over the first 5 years. But if I leave it in the 401k, I can't just go buy a treasury. I can't just go buy an individual bond that matures at a particular time. So how do I manage that within a 401k structure? That's a great question, Kelly. And some of the reasons to leave in a 401k rather than roll to an IRA are some of the ones that you mentioned. The investment options are going to be reviewed by professionals. You have the access to potentially institutional shares, which will have lower cost, etc. Offers greater credit protection to some extent on a federal level. So there's some advantages there. So how do you map in building an income floor within a 401k? And I think you're on the right track there, Kelly. But first off, I would say if your 401k has a brokerage option, like a brokerage link option, you do have the potential, if your 401k gives you that option, to move a certain amount of money over to that option and just go buy treasuries or individual bills. But let's assume that's not the case, Kelly. I would look first at your insured cash account, which most 401ks have, which is going to be like a money market account. And if it's an insured cash account, also called a guaranteed cash account, some 401ks have very attractive options that are well above normal money market rates. So that would be an option. And I would say if you're building out a 5-year income floor, I would have the first 2, maybe 3. I'd have your contingency fund and the first 2 years in that. And then I think it's appropriate to use a short-term bond fund for the remainder of that floor and then rebalance. The key would be in the first 2 years at least, you want to have that in an insured cash account or something that's not going to go up and down. The short-term bond funds in 99% of the times should work for what you're doing. The exception would be this last year where we had almost the worst bond market in history. Probably didn't work so well then. So you will end up taking some principal risk because you're in a fund rather than in something that matures. But I think that's how I would fold this into a 401k. So let me know if that helps answer your questions. And if not, we'll address more later on. Our next question comes from Cammie, who is looking at bonds. Cammie says, my husband and I are recently retired. We have a significant amount of cash in an interest income account in our 401k. It earns about 2.25% a year. These are the funds that we are living on for the next several years while we pray for the stock market to go back up again. I get that. We would like to find a way to earn higher interest on that cash if we pulled it out and put it into treasury bills or a good CD, as those rates are getting better. We'd have to pay taxes on it at the time of the withdrawal. Is there a way to roll those funds into an IRA and purchase T-bills or CDs within an IRA? I know there are bond funds, but I don't really understand them, and the current rate of return doesn't look that attractive. That's a great question, Cammie. 2.25% actually isn't that bad in an insured cash account within a 401k, but the interest rate environment has changed dramatically over the last year or so. So you do not have to pull the money out of the 401k and pay taxes on it in order to buy treasury bills, CDs, or individual bonds. What you could do is, as you stated, roll your 401k into an IRA via a direct rollover, which will be essentially a trustee, which is your 401k, to the trustee of your IRA. And that could be any brokerage firm, Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, etc. And it would still stay under the umbrella of tax deferral within the IRA. And within that tax deferred umbrella of your IRA account, you're free to buy lots of different types of investments, including treasury bills, individual bonds, and CDs. So you would still have a lot of flexibility in what you could actually put the money into, even if you moved it outside the 401k. So you definitely don't have to take it out just to buy T-bills. And looking at T-bills, at least at the time of this recording, a 6-month T-bill is about 4.7%. Now, if you move the entire 401k out of the umbrella of 401k to an IRA, just realize this insured cash account that you reference where you're getting 2.25% a year, those type of accounts are specific to 401ks. And if you take the 401k money out, you just won't have that option again. So you'll have to stick with individual bonds, CDs, and or T-bills, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all, at least in this environment. So you can accomplish what you want by just moving it directly to an IRA, doing a trustee to trustee transfer or a direct rollover. The key there is you don't want to have the money paid directly to you, meaning that when you see a check, it doesn't say to Cami, it should say to the custodian of your IRA for the benefit of Cami. And you can work with your benefits department to navigate that.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. All right, in the next 7 days, assuming you did the sprint last week where you updated your net worth statement, I want you to reassess the trajectory of your goals relative to retirement. If you're using retirement planning software of some sort, get everything up to date, see how that feasibility number comes out. Are you still on a feasible course, given the fact that you likely have lost money in your financial assets last year? If you're not on course, then you're going to have some additional steps of, okay, what do I need to focus on to get back on course? What risks do I need to shore up? What opportunities might I take advantage of? That could involve saving more. It could involve moderating some of your goals. It could moderate when you retire. It could moderate your portfolio. It could change whether you do some part-time work or not. This is going to be a basis for negotiation if you're off course, because you got to get back on course. Can't just hope is not a strategy if you don't have agency and pathways to go along with it. So reassess where you're at and detach yourself a little bit. This is a problem to be solved. Maybe give yourself, if you're really far off course, give yourself a day, maybe an hour to just sort of, oh, crap, what am I going to do now? Give yourself some time to just emotionally feel it and then put that aside and focus on how do I make this better? Use your agency. So that's your task if you choose to accept it. Man, I can't believe January is almost over. Oh, that was a good month. I'm 56 now. So that means rounding, I go up to 60 if you were to round it to the decade. And I am now only 1 year younger than my wife. For I have about a month and 4 days every year where she's 2 years older than I. So I no longer can hold that over her head. So now I'm only a year older than she is. But that fun will come around again. I hope you're having a great start to the year. Oh, by the way, February is going to be all Q&A. I'm just going to answer your questions. So if you have a question, go to rogerwhitney.com/askroger. And then in March, we're going to go back to themes and we're going to do going from 2 to 1, whether that's being divorced or having a spouse pass away and some of the issues and opportunities that come up with that kind of transition. So that's what we're going to do in March. So I'm excited to walk this with you. Have a great day. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.